welcome Adiza Tajani.
Good afternoon, and thank you for taking time out of your busy lunch hour to come to our session. So the FinTech Hub sessions have been taking place across the Inno Tribe this week. On Monday, we did Canada. Yesterday, we did the APAC region. And today is the turn of EMEA. So if you could give a warm welcome to our panelists who have taken the time out of their busy schedules to represent their different respective hubs. Thank you for joining us. So if you'd like to start with introductions.
Yep. So I have to sit down again, right? So I'm Fabian van den Reyt. I'm Executive Chairman at Beehive Europe, headquartered in Brussels with offices in London, New York, Tel Aviv, and soon Singapore. And we are a platform where our banks, insurance, and market infrastructures and 130 startups work together on collective innovation in non-competitive areas, which we can talk about later.
Sophie?
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie Blackstead. Having spent most of my career building banks, I now run a startup, a blockchain-based startup, but I'm here representing the Nordic FinTech hubs. Mostly Stockholm, which I'm a board advisor for, but I also sit in the Copenhagen FinTech hub, and we're opening new hubs in Helslo. So I represent the Nordics, and there are about 500 FinTech startups across the Nordics, mostly concentrated in Sweden, but there's a huge amount of growth going on there, so looking forward to this.
James?
Good afternoon, James Scott. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for Wholesale at Barclays Africa. I'm based in Johannesburg, and part of that portfolio is what we do with RISE out of Cape Town, which is really our external innovation hub, where we're driving a lot of our external innovation with fintechs, co-creation with our partnership model, and we're also obviously running a collaborative working space out of Cape Town.
Great. Omni?
Hi, I'm Omoni Olale. I'm the CEO of Aerofi Technologies, fintech entrepreneur from Lagos, Nigeria.
Oliver?
Hi, my name is Oliver Wisman. I'm president of Crypto Valley Association, one of the fastest growing ecosystem for blockchain, cryptocurrency, ICO startups in Switzerland.
So the way that we'll run this panel is that we'll start with some questions to the panelists, and then we'll open up to the audience for a wider discussion. So, Oliver, would you like to start by telling us a little bit about your hub and what makes people in your hub excited?
And the hub that I'm talking about, the Crypto Valley Association, is something that we set up beginning of the year, because in the area south of Zurich called Zug, there is the Ethereum Foundation being placed in 2014. So there is now an ecosystem of startups providing technology from a blockchain, cryptocurrency, and ICO business. And our objective is to grow and expand that ecosystem with startups, with investors, with working together with the government on the legislation and policies, with the research part, with the university to see what's coming next down the road. We have run about 400 members. We are growing 20 to 30 members per week. The reason for that is that's one of the places globally that startups have access to a global capital pool. Because as you know, as a startup, you have to find the right VC, matching your culture, find the right way to work together. That's always a challenge for those startups because it takes 50% of the time of those executives. Now with the decentralized model of crowdfunding with the ICOs, that's possible in Switzerland in an organized, FINMA-regulated way. There are over almost 800 million capital raised over the last 6 months. There are over 70, I call it IPOs, or token-generated events in the pipeline. So there is a way to innovate, get access to capital, have access to a working space, the environment, working with the government to solve issues from a taxation, legal, accounting perspective, because everything is new, no? In the token economy perspective. And then also working with the experts on framework, how tokens should be classified, how should token be regulated, etc. So all questions to enable a new economy at the end. It's now possible in that ecosystem, and the organization that we are doing is bringing those ecosystem players together, from investors to startups that, we get 5 to 10 requests per day coming globally into the hub. So it's not only a Swiss piece, it's a global movement from my perspective. And so helping them to get settled, giving them the right contact, and to establish them. And then also the investors coming in, because I can tell you, we have not only investors coming from Asia, Silicon Valley, US, because they want to see how is it working, how to invest. There's so much liquidity out there. So I would say it's a fascinating movement right now, and something that now I'm in the blockchain business over the last 3-4 years that I even didn't predict it over the last 12 months, I would say, or 12 months ago. No?
Thank you, Oliver. So, Ami, what's going on in the Nigerian fintech ecosystem?
So Nigeria is by far the most active entrepreneurial cluster in Africa, especially with regards to fintech. So there was Vanso that was acquired by InterSwitch, and then Flutterwave is the wave around the continent now that provides a unified set of APIs for different sets of players in the ecosystem to make payments. I'm not aware of any specific fintech-only hub in Nigeria, but then when you look at Lagos, which is the epicenter, CC Hub will be the most prominent one. And the thing that is interesting about the hub in Nigeria is that it has been driven almost entirely from the entrepreneurial community. In fact, the government was forced to give attention to the startup ecosystem when we had the likes of Mark Zuckerberg come to Lagos. And instead of first visiting the president or the governor of Lagos State, the first place he went to was CC Hub, and he met with the developers, and then visited Andela, walked along the road, jumping over the puddles of water. And only after that did he go to visit the government officials. And after that, you see these government officials calling the startup ecosystem to say, okay, how can we help? So I think that's a very interesting model.
Great. And I'm going to do something that I haven't done in previous panels. I also represent London. So London has been known in EMEA as a great fintech hub. And I was part of the founding team of a fintech hub called Level 39. So I spent 3.5 years attracting global money and global companies to London. So today I'll be bringing that perspective to this panel as well as moderating. James?
Cape Town's giving Nigeria a good run for the money. I'll represent Rise out of Cape Town. We're obviously very focused on our partnership with Techstars. We're accelerating a lot of companies that are solving problems on the African continent, not really South Africa only. I think the interesting thing we're seeing kind of more broadly across the continent is about 180 hubs in Africa. So I think that's a good macro indicator as to there's a lot of startups. We're seeing some investment come in. It's about 33% up year on year, which means there's money going into these companies. A lot of that money is actually coming from offshore as well. I think that the model in Cape Town, certainly what I like from a bank point of view is we're starting to see a lot of those startups work, obviously, with our own organization. They're becoming part of our value proposition out to our clients. And we're really starting to see that kind of the Rise model for us has been also this kind of global regional play where we're connected to what's going on more globally from a fintech point of view. We're working with a lot of startups that come out of the US or Europe, and we're also looking to export a lot of startups from Africa into those markets as well.
Sophie?
Yeah, so the Nordics has always been at the forefront of technology innovation. We've got a high proportion of unicorns per head, and I think, in fact, Sweden has the highest proportion of unicorns per head. We've got Klarna, we've got Spotify, we've got Tradeshift. But until recently, we didn't have dedicated fintech hubs in the region. The Copenhagen hub has just celebrated its first birthday this week. Last week, I missed the party, unfortunately. And the Stockholm hub is less than a year old. So although we've got a lot of dedicated working spaces for startups, this is really new in the fintech area. And we have a massive amount of innovation and creativity, particularly in the financial technology area, going on. We've got over 500 FinTech startups in the region, which in a region of 27 million people is phenomenal. And about half of those are based in Sweden, which is the biggest growth area. Having said that, Copenhagen is rapidly becoming crypto island. We've got a lot of blockchain companies in the FinTech hub where I sit there. And in Stockholm, we have the world's first green digital finance centre. Which is a not-for-profit focused on applying financial technology, FinTech ideas to the sustainability agenda. And through that, we're working very closely with the United Nations, and we've been able to build a broad collaborative network, which I'll talk about in a minute. So although we're very young, we're growing very rapidly. Both of the hubs in Copenhagen and Stockholm are expanding at a rate of knots, both in floor space and in number of tenants. We're working very closely with governments, with regulators, and with the local commercial banks. So in Stockholm, we have all of the big banks coming in. We have several in Copenhagen as well. Very close collaboration with the universities, and again, in particular in Copenhagen, fantastic collaboration there. And yeah, it's just been very, very positive for us with commercial and public organizations.
Great. Fabian?
So about Brussels, Brussels is the heart of Europe. And if I can quote one of the famous Belgian artists, René Magritte, this is not a FinTech hub. This is a place where banks, insurance companies, market infrastructure, so you can see if you go to our stand, you will see who our shareholders are, Swift being one of them, decided to engage more actively, but together with startups and universities to look at issues or opportunities, challenges where they want to do innovation together. And so our focus is primarily on delivering projects or delivering standards in areas where we think Belgium and Brussels have some assets since a long time. Brussels is home to lots of back office and market infrastructure. Brussels is home to lots of encryption, cyber expertise, especially in the universities. And Brussels also has a lot of capabilities in all sorts of payments. So why I say it's not a FinTech hub is I hate silos. I think I said that a year or two ago at this same place. So we are using technology to solve problems that financial institutions face and startups want to address. But that goes beyond the classical, what you would consider FinTech as payments or securities and things like that. Just to wrap up on that, so the government, the federal and regional government of Belgium is a shareholder to this because their view is that Brussels has a role to play within Europe to coordinate and talk to other hubs in Europe. Belgium's is 80% export, so it's an open economy. But we also want to function to attract talent into Brussels and in Europe because in certain areas we lack some talents, and then help export our startup to other markets where they can grow.
Great, thank you. One of the big topics when it comes to FinTech innovation and the FinTech hubs is the actual point of view when it comes to collaboration and partnerships. And what we saw in the early days in London was that there needed to be strong commitment, financial commitment, commitment from organizations to actually make sure it's not just an MOU that's signed and great PR, but moving beyond that. So it'll be great to sort of understand all of your understanding of what types of partnerships and collaborations have been built in your hubs and what has been successful. Sophie, would you like to start?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the Green Digital Finance Centre that we've built in Stockholm, and I think that that's a great example. I mean, in general, the Nordics are a region which has always been very collaborative. We've always been very open. Even the banks collaborate, which is, I think, quite unusual generally from a regional perspective. And the strength of the region is that we are very good at collaborating, although there's competition as well. And also we have some shared values, but we found that those shared values and shared agendas are actually shared by other countries globally. So partly through the hubs and partly through Stockholm Green Digital Finance, we've been able to build not just regional but global networks as well. We have, over the last really 6 months or so, built a strong network of fintechs with a sustainability agenda, and we've built strong collaborations with fintech hubs all over the world, in particularly in Southeast Asia. You mentioned MOUs. We've signed a couple with Singapore, both from Stockholm and Copenhagen. And indeed, here in Canada, we've been working with the government of Ontario and various hubs here as well. So I think that the collaborations have been one of the key strengths that we've seen. And I have seen it personally move from a sort of more of a competition to more of a, I guess you could call it co-opetition, going forward. So between the hubs, it's great, and of course with the wider ecosystem, with the banks and with government and commercial organisations, it's absolutely fantastic as well.
And Oliver, we also did a partnership in London when you were at UBS and when I was at level 39. So
exactly. It's not limited to you're part of one hub. I'm part of the Innovate Finance Hub as a global ambassador. I'm part of the Financial Service Roundtable in the US. So being connected in the different networks is key, because it's personal relationships, you know each other, and it's a global business, especially in the technology that I'm in. And I would say in addition to that is coming from the Crypto Valley perspective is two dimensions. Additionally, I would say because it's a wide space, the whole token economy, it's because there is over 4 years expertise in the legal and regulation part, is sharing recommendation frameworks that we have developed over the last few months with the different central banks. So we are in really contact with the central banks. We get a lot of requests out of different regions to discuss and explain more our framework, how tokens should be classified, how the token should be regulated, and because there's a lot of questions, also lack of information, I would say, and this will help us to make sure that the model will mature and become really a professional business. Even then, also we get a lot of requests out of different regions to work on the code of conduct for ICOs. Because there's a need to...
Do you mind defining ICOs? Just
ICO
people in the audience.
Initial coin offering. That's a new way to get funding or issue a token as a utility token to get paid, for example. So it's a new way of to get funded, operate, etc. So there's a different version of usage of those tokens. And again, this open up a capital pool globally that usually are constrained through the VCs.
Right.
And so, as I said before, this is something that it's enabling the startups to get access to it. It needs improvement, it needs regulation, but our job is to share the learning curve, because again, the foundation, the Ethereum Foundation was built up 4 years ago in Switzerland to share that. The second dimension, I would say, is R&D research. Because this is not only a startup development initiative, there's a lot of going on in the universities. Mm-hmm. And so we teamed up with the IEEE organization, the Engineering Standardization Organization, to have the first blockchain conference next year coming from a R&D academia perspective. So we have around about 20 professors in universities in our scientific advisory board to pick the next trend in that area. And we have already started call out for papers to submit out of the universities, and the best 20 will be presented next year. So that's a way also to look into what's coming down the road maybe in 12, 24 months. So that's something that is not a local university theme, it's a connected network of universities.
And James, the Barclays Rise program is a program with Techstars and Barclays coming together. So for those in the audience that aren't aware, Techstars builds innovation programs for corporates. So when you started that journey a few years ago to now, how's it been? And would you rather have done it in-house yourselves fully, or having someone from Silicon Valley help you do that? How has that been?
I don't think we would have done it ourselves, quite frankly. I think that Techstars have brought a huge amount of competency to our environment. They've helped us lift certainly the thinking in the organization, as well as what's going on in the broader community in Cape Town and in Africa. I think, I like the point where you mentioned that a whole lot of banks are getting together. I don't think we're there yet in Africa. We're still kind of chasing each other, I think. But the next evolution of that model, I think, is absolutely how we start getting a lot of banks in our own environment into these hubs. We start solving common problems. We get government a little bit more involved. So I see a huge opportunity in that space. The other thing, when we talk about collaboration, I think the huge benefit we're seeing, and we didn't really see this when we entered this journey, was that bringing a lot of our own clients into this environment and connecting them with the fintechs and the global kind of RISE community. What we're starting to see is adjacent revenue opportunities, business models potentially evolving. And I think that's quite a nice spin-off, where we didn't go in thinking that that was what we were going to do, but we're seeing huge benefit coming out of that space.
And Omni, as an entrepreneur, what types of partnerships and collaborations have helped in your region in Nigeria as a fintech entrepreneur?
So there's two things you need to understand about Nigerians. Number one is that we love to hustle. It's in our DNA. And that's not a bad thing. It's really, it's what gets us off the bed in the morning. Secondly, we're dealing with very down-to-earth flesh and blood problems, right? So, and that's where you see the collaboration at the very ground level. There are young entrepreneurs that need a space to work out of, and then there's someone that's got an extra space in his office that is willing to offer for free. So there's a company that has just gone through Y Combinator and is trying to encourage other companies to apply. So he pays for 3 Ghanaian startups and other African startups to come to their office to put them through how to get that done. So these kind of practical solutions, there are hubs in Lagos, but the hubs in Lagos cannot possibly take care of all the needs in the country. So you have hubs springing up in Abuja and in other parts of the country, and you have input from those who have done it already in Lagos, helping those in the other countries to set things up. You have, there's not been much collaboration with the government, but there's been a lot of collaboration among the entrepreneurs, and there's been a lot of collaboration between the hubs and big corporates like Google and Facebook and Microsoft. So for instance, you have the Microsoft Big Spark program that trains young software developers and provides them with credits for cloud hosting. Google hosts this regular UX UI training sessions, and recently there was this pitch drive where they took about 20 startups from across Africa to pitch to European investors across the continent. So this kind of very tangible cooperation that is necessary when you're building an ecosystem from start. That's what you have. And like I said earlier, when you begin to get these things together and the government begins to see the effects and the results of it, then it becomes more natural for them, for you to get their attention. So recently, the governor of Lagos State, for instance, came to the Yaba cluster, which is the main epicenter of startup activity, and was promising to assign some kind of special status to the area so that electricity supply will be better in that area for the startups that are there.
So one thing that was key for the London growth of the London fintech ecosystem was the private sector and the public sector getting together. So one thing that people aren't that aware of is that Level 39 was founded by a property company. So the Canary Wharf Group, who own all of the real estate in Canary Wharf, are actually behind the fintech hub of Level 39. Having a pioneering Romanian CEO, who is an engineer, to actually dedicate resources to hire a team of technologists to build a fintech hub was something that was quite high risk, but he also was able to bring together different players from government and also from the private sector. But so what do you think the types of supports in your different regions are needed for public and private partnerships?
So what you outlined, there's different ways to set it up. Now,
yeah.
You can hope that the government is waking up and somebody is doing this, which is more an exception. Asia is doing, Singapore is doing well from that perspective, or you have a public company a private company tried to set up, or I've been through this the last few months, is grassroots. So you have 5-10 people passionate about the topic, understanding now how to describe and mobilize an ecosystem, and with that momentum you can grow and get support out of different areas. So something that, again, last year I couldn't see that, but it's possible if you have people running this kind of, I would say, almost like a startup. No? So you start from scratch. You build your network, you position, like an open source. You have working groups working on various topics. Utilize that as a momentum and get started.
Fabian?
Maybe if I can come back for a minute on what you said about competition and what you said about universities. The way we see collaboration is our clients, the banks, the insurers, the market infrastructure, they are global. The investors, they are global. The startup and scale-up, they want to be global. So you can't address this by offering a kind of country-only vertical, protective approach. So because your clients don't want that, so you have to collaborate.
Yeah.
It's true that every city wants to shine as a fintech hub because it has some economical impact, but I think Europe needs that collaboration if we want to retain or at least grow the technology industry in general. We have to collaborate. And I think the universities, if we just look for a minute at universities, they have been doing that forever. They have been sending researchers from university in Bologna up to the Nordics and vice versa. European students have their Erasmus program since I don't know many years. I don't see why we couldn't do the same, and we do, but I think we can do more. Having more interchanges between hubs, as from the moment they are assets that are complementary and they are common goals.
Yeah.
And then also tapping in certain talent pools. We talked about that there are Swiss blockchain companies also in Copenhagen, etc. So because the talent pool is limited, I see more global tapping into global talent pools and working in different locations as it's part of the normal DNA.
It has to be part of the norm. I mean, my company alone, I have people in Australia, in EMEA, in America, everywhere. And that is the new normal. As you were saying, we've got 6 of Bitcoin Swiss's resources in the lab in Copenhagen because they happen to be Danish. But who you are and where you live shouldn't limit who you work for and how you operate in the ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly.
I also think I agree with your point that it's very important that we have a balance between public and private money and public and private influence, because if you are a wholly government-owned and run institution, you're subject to all sorts of restrictions and constraints, and it would put people off. I mean, it would put off the talent, it would put off the fintechs, and it would certainly put off the private companies. So it's important to maintain that balance. And we've got slightly different models across the Nordics. Sometimes it's more public, sometimes it's more private. Stockholm, we're almost completely private funded, which works very well. But again, I mean, I think to the point about the Barclays model, it's very healthy to have a variety of corporate money coming in and not be perceived to be owned by a single corporate. And I think one of the challenges that the banks in particular see with their accelerator programs and their labs and their garages is that very few fintechs want to be owned by a bank. They all want to work with the banks and they want to collaborate with the banks. But if you are branded as being a Visa or a Barclays, then I think that restricts significantly who you can work with directly.
Well, so Token is a Silicon Valley open banking startup with offices in London, and we actually have bank money as part of the first investment raise. So we raised 18.5 million in April, and that was from purely European investors. So the OP Bank in Finland, they gave us some money. So did EQT Ventures from Sweden, they gave us some money, and so did Octopus Ventures from the UK. So as a Silicon Valley company working on a European problem, we have money from all over Europe, as well as American money as well from seed level. So we're actually a classic example of that happening. And from a talent perspective, we have talent from all over the world. Russians, Argentinians, Brazilians, Brits, and quite a mix.
I agree, capital wants to move and people want to move. And that's in the European Constitution since some time. But I think when you collaborate, you have to have a purpose to collaborate also. Because signing MOUs, I think you said that, I can sign 10 MOUs before the end of the week. But what do you do with them?
Yeah.
And I think if we want to collaborate between hubs, people collaboration, capital collaboration, but you need to have a goal. His goal is the crypto asset, the crypto money.
Yeah, exactly.
My goal is to look at shared services for financial institutions in cyber, in KYC, in APIs. You might have similar or different goals, but I'm sure there are overlapping goals in most of our hubs. And I think that's where we need to be very practical and very concrete on how we want to collaborate.
Yeah, at the end, our goal is to unlock bottlenecks, no? From a capital, from resource, know-how perspective, and it has to be a meaningful outcome, no? Because you're right, there's a lot of marketing going on with these kind of memorandum of understandings, and but we get measured by impact at the end, no? How we change the needle and generate jobs globally and able to make the changes, the structural changes happening.
Ami, you going to say something?
Yeah, so I was going to say that that's the reason why I am personally biased in favor of ecosystems and hubs that grow from the grassroots.
Yeah.
There's a community-driven effort. That way you can keep your vision. The vision is not being dictated or influenced by some public body or by a big corporate. They only come to you because they've seen the impact that you're making already. And in that sense, you run the hub or the ecosystem like another startup on its own.
Yeah.
And startup entrepreneurs and people that get things done, they like to get things done.
Yes.
They don't have time for long bureaucracy and long meetings. So if you have a community-driven effort, you have a better chance of actually getting things done because you are focused on scaling or providing value. You're not so encumbered with protectionist and nationalistic or some other. I mean, you're not worried about the next election, right?
Not particularly.
But if it's been dictated by the government, these are some of the practical considerations that will affect how the direction goes.
Yeah, and that's why you shouldn't be a government-owned institution. And of course, all the startup hubs are also startups. I mean, in each case, they're a group of people who've come together with a vision and an idea. I mean, in many cases, yes, there's been a government paper that says we really need a hub, but that doesn't happen in isolation, and it doesn't happen without the entrepreneurs founding it, building it, bringing in the ecosystem, bringing in the startups and making it happen. So yeah, I mean, hubs are startup organizations run by startups for startups.
Yeah.
And I
don't want to categorize. If it's all startup, it's good. If it's startup mixed with something else, it's less good. I think both are good. As from the moment, you're very right that they are run as startup. That's key.
Yeah.
No, that was something that was actually very key in the founding of Level 39. The CEO of the Canary Wharf Group said, here it is, even though you are part of a huge $2 billion property conglomerate, you said you wanted to do something as a startup, so I had to set up the payment system and roll it out so that our members could pay us the money. Even though we did have a big IT team to help support, we still had to do those practical, hard graft things ourselves.
But there are small differences because I think Level 39 is still commercially driven.
Yeah.
Third and association are non-profit because we are not getting measured how much profit we make, is how much value we how jobs, capital we are bringing.
But I think that one of the key things that's important is that Steve Kirsch, who's the founder of Token, this is his 7th technology company. If I had said to him, Steve, give up some equity to Level 39 when he first came to Europe, he wouldn't have done that because he's a serious technology entrepreneur. So how you shape and formulate the foundations of your hub is very key. And if you want to bring global entrepreneurs to your hub, you need to act like a global player and also bring that sort of mindset
absolutely.
there.
I think you have to build a brand. Level 39 is a brand, and you have to be part of the community, the global community, and that's different than a typical company, from a PR and marketing perspective. You're much more content network driven than in a traditional business.
Yeah, and you also need a flavour. I mean, to the points you were making, you know, we're not in ivory towers, we're not isolated, we're not siloed, but that doesn't mean we don't develop our own characters. And obviously you have a very strong character, and we have a variety. I mean, as I said, in the Nordics, we've got this green thing going on, which is very, it was peculiar to the Nordics. It has been driven largely from the Nordics, but there are lots of other hubs and lots of other centres globally which share our values, and we have found this is a tool for anchoring relationships and partnerships globally, where perhaps those other organisations wouldn't have found that kind of partnership without the hubs. So it's a way of, I mean, it's not exactly a brand, but it's a way of indicating your interests and your values, and then finding other people who share those values and their interests, whether they're blockchain, whether they're standardization, or whether it's sustainability.
Different technology, because at the end, for me, it's the excitement, because the passion of the people driving the agenda, devoting extra time, and that's for me something that is
And you need to have genetic variety in everything. If all hubs were the same, it would be one, pretty boring, and two, fairly inefficient, because we would always do exactly the same thing in the same way, which is not what innovation is all about.
So one thing that is important to talk about is the challenges. So within all of these conversations, I think that one of the key things is to understand that this is not an easy thing to do. And so it would be great to sort of understand what sort of the key challenges or pain points that you're having in your hubs are. Who would like to start?
I'll have a go.
Go for it, James.
Tying on to that last conversation, being maybe the only banker, well, current banker on the panel, I mean, we are under pressure to show value, and how we measure that value, you know, it has to be commercial in nature at some level. Also, obviously, we're trying to, you know, stimulate the entrepreneurship ecosystem in our environment. We're also trying to learn. So value for us is, you know, Bipin, my friend from Wells Fargo, calls it ROI, return on innovation, where we are looking for those metrics, and we will manage through these cycles a little bit. So I think one challenge for us is making sure as a bank we're very clear on what we're trying to achieve, and that we are quite focused on the outcome. The other thing for us particularly, and I think this is maybe an African thing, obviously, we haven't really got the regulatory component right. So we've been trying to take the regulator on the journey with us. South Africa is quite unique. Our president there changes his cabinet every couple of weeks, depending on his mood, which is a challenge for us when you're talking about, you know, frontier technologies, or you're trying to shift some policy thinking, where every time you get in a room with the regulators, it's different people. So we have that real challenge in Africa, and I think skills will always be a gap. You know, so we have great entrepreneurs, we've got good SMEs in the banks. There will be certain competencies that we would need to tap into, like a global network for, and that could be in data science, it could be in other competencies.
Yeah, and skills and labour mobility is a general challenge, although we can help each other with that. But I think even, you know, coming from the other perspective, and, you know, having worked in banks, obviously I understand the challenge. That I think the agility of the banks probably is one of our biggest challenges as well. Although we have the banks in the hub, and we welcome them in as teams, we often get the sense that they just want to put some people in there to tick a box, rather than actually understanding how to engage with and collaborate with fintechs, and I think the fintechs have the same problem, and I've heard that as a theme throughout this week. It is, you know, it's the divided by the same language, that everyone wants to collaborate, but the pace and the heartbeat of the banking culture is just so different to the pace and heartbeat of fintech startups, and even putting them in the same space isn't necessarily the answer. And, you know, a bank will regard a partnership as something that, you know, you can fund next year when the budget comes through, and the startup, particularly the hub, needs money yesterday so that they can pay the builders and the lighting. So that, I think, the different pace and heartbeats of the collaboration is a big challenge for all of us, I would say. I don't know about you guys.
Collaboration is a minimum, because, again, this is a connected world, and we have to work together. And I have to say, we face different challenges. It's volume. Because you got 5 to 10 requests per day, startups coming into the valley, and so we had to develop an onboarding process. That means whatever you need, capital, expertise to set up your company, how to open up bank accounts, office space, whatever you need to get settled in a way that, you know, they can have a checklist going through that, and so that they have a good chance to, in organized ways, to do it, because the volume is to not handle. The same also on the investor side, matching investors to the community, using then also the community to drive the legal discussion on policy to it. So at the end, what I'm saying is you have big problems, and utilizing the community to make it accessible, and then also share this with the other world. Absolutely. We share our practices. We did this with Germany and in Austria. They have now a similar association following our principles. So that's something that I think we can learn from each other, figuring out who kind of best practice and working on, because we face always the same questions.
Yeah.
Our challenge is, again, different, which shows you that we are somehow different, because we do innovation project with startups and financial institutions to build code at the end. The challenge we have is, because we have insurance, banking, market infrastructure, is to find common topics that they want to look at. So actually focusing on a certain number of topics is our challenge, because there are so many possibilities. That's one. And the second is to deliver fast, because when you do collective innovation, that's very well, it's great, but at one point in time, somebody needs to decide that that thing is ready to go on production, and that needs to go fast. So going fast and focusing for us are the two major challenges.
But I think you face different challenges, because you're looking still into traditional business models. And the technology that we are trying to in the Valley to address is a totally different setup.
Of course.
Totally different setup that the certain existing player will not be part anymore going forward. We saw the VC business getting really diminished in that business. Around about 70-80% of funding for blockchain-ready technology is now coming out of a different source now.
Yeah.
So we have to keep in mind where we want to go. How fast you want to move, because certain players will slow you down.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to get Omi's challenges in there.
Sorry. I was just going to add to the investor challenge that the majority of funding still goes towards solutions which can solve known problems in existing business models. And I mean, personally, given that I'm running a blockchain startup with a behavioral analytics engine, I have found that a challenge. And I think what we see is a concentration of smaller fintech startups which are solving known problems rather than more transformational startups for that very reason. And that's a problem in the Nordics.
But I think the mechanism allows you now to get access. So you have a challenge to get convince VCs about your very visionary plan, and it's hard to get funding. Now you have a chance to do that, and that is, for me, unblocking the whole, ensuring that those kind of ideas have a chance to get tested. We know that, like 20 years ago with the internet companies, that 80-90% will not survive. There will be brutal selection process, but that's fine.
And the funding models are changing, and capital
the funding model is changing.
Just to get your voice in there.
I think that Nigeria is probably going to be the youngest startup ecosystem in this group. So the challenge in Nigeria is that you're trying to build all the component parts of the ecosystem at the same time with little or no tangible support, right? So you find that even the hubs themselves are dealing with some of the problems that the startups are dealing with. My friend runs CC Hub that I mentioned, and one of these days I was there and he was telling me the amount of money that they spend on fueling the generator for the startups to work, and that is like a big headache. So you have young entrepreneurs, you need mentoring for them, but you need local and specific expertise from people who have done those kind of businesses in that environment, not some guy coming from Harvard or MIT or from London. No, someone that has done this in Lagos, and you don't have enough of those. The community has really risen up to provide that mentorship. But then, I mean, when the entrepreneur goes beyond that stage, then you need capital, which is really a big problem. It's not just a buzzword in Lagos. You need capital to get things going, and the capital is not readily available. There's a local angel network that is growing up, but there's still a lot of deficiency in that. Then, of course, when you're talking about fintech specifically, then you also need to get the buy-in of the government and the regulators and the banks, and that is a totally different headache on its own.
Great, and on that note, we will open up for questions. So the way this will work is that we have some runners who will be able to take your question. So when you have a question, please stand up and say your name and then ask your question. Who's got a question? Oh, great.
Hello, Giselle. I'm Bruno Diniz from the Brazilian Hub. I'm going
see
to
you
be
tomorrow.
speaking tomorrow. I'm going to address this question to Mr. Oliver Busman about the Crypto Valley. I read recently that you guys are creating some kind of self-regulation in order to discipline the space.
Yeah.
So I would like to know what the regulators are saying in Switzerland about ICOs specifically, and what do you guys are planning to keep being the forefront of the ICOs and the blockchain space.
If you go to our website cryptovalley.swiss, you find a lot of documents about how we want to tackle this. And the number one problem with the regulator is to provide information transparency about the varieties of tokens, because again, the security token, utility, commodity token, etc. And we, in discussion with FINMA, with the regulator, it's very clear, if there's a security-related token, the existing laws should be applied. And that means you have a clear process from an AML, KYC perspective. So I think the focus on our side is to show what kind of token options are out there. And again, the startups not only applying one token anymore, they are token for to get funding for non-profit activities, for partnership, etc. But then you have to bring the regulator up to speed on how you want to treat those tokens. And so there's a lot of legal expertise now available that I want to recommend to everybody to look at. Number two is there should be clear self-guidance and regulation, self-regulation also from the community on how those ICO events should be managed. What are the discipline, what kind of values, etc., should be the minimum standards globally. So we are working on that, and then we open that to the global community, hopefully in the next 3 to 4 weeks, to share. And then we share this also with the so at the end is we want to make sure that the whole process is absolutely professional, high standards, etc., because there's a belief this will change. The way how we get raise capital, how we do business in the future, because it enables us today physical assets to bring on the digital side. And so we have to find a way to address this. This is absolutely in a professional way. So that's the reason why there's a lot of information out there. I recommend to go to the website. We are now teaming up with other hubs and the regulator, because it's not a Swiss-specific issue. It is an issue that everybody is addressing. But I have to say, regulation differs by location, what is security or not. So the SEC has a different interpretation, etc. And then depending on that, you should follow that. The important part is, I see now even late-stage startups coming and saying, we want to do this in the most professional way, communication, transparency, KYC, onboarding, because we feel this is the most efficient way in the future, instead of 50% of my time that I spend on fundraising and finding the right VC, to use the time for innovation instead of for administration.
Thank you, Oliver.
Amazing. Thank you.
Next question. Yes, sir?
Yeah.
Oh, we're recording, so yes, please.
Oh, you are recording?
We are recording.
Okay. Rick de Den from Oracle. We've heard a lot about collaboration between fintechs and banks. Is big tech suffocating you, or is there a role for us in co-creation of innovation?
Can I take?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, so we're working a lot with big tech as well, and perhaps I should have talked more about that. We find that the partnerships work well. but there are different flavors for different types of companies. So there are some large platforms in particular, the global companies, who the fintechs and therefore the hubs are more wary of working with because they have an agenda of acquisition. Let's put it that way. I'm not looking at you. And others with whom we collaborate more comfortably, I think is reasonable to say. And of course, the tech corporations are a very important source of support for us from a resource perspective, from a knowledge perspective, and from a collaboration perspective as well. So yes, absolutely, we do work with the big corps, more with some than others, I would say.
That's why I don't want to use the term fintech. It's tech. You have young tech and I wouldn't say old tech, by the way, but bigger tech. It's also, on top of that, I think everybody's looking at platforms those days, to operate platforms, to offer foundation for platform APIs and things like that. And I think large tech do that. And in that respect, they're very useful also by domain to engage with some startup which are, in payments or in securities. Those large tech can offer that. And then in terms of R&D, we were talking about of course, the large tech also have large R&D pools which can be useful.
Now, on our side is because we are organized in an open source way in working groups. There's a huge demand now also from traditional players to be part of those working groups because you get access to expertise that is pretty early in the cycle. You have full visibility who's coming in, what kind of problem they try to solve, how also these tax legal accounting issues be solved. Because I can tell you, if you have those kind of technology bringing your enterprise customer, they have the same question. If we have already that expertise, how to overcome that, because there are leading companies try to solve this from that perspective, that's a huge value. I see now the traditional player coming in and saying we want to be part of that and learn and contribute. That's one. The second is this R&D piece, is in an organized way to be part of the scientific boards, advisory boards, working with the professors etc. to select in which area we should go deeper, and then you see what's coming back. It's eye-opening at the end. No? And so finding that value proposition is for me now, I didn't see that coming also beginning of the year. Now there is a need to collaborate and bring everybody up to speed.
Omni, you mentioned during your contributions the fact that Mark Zuckerberg came to Nigeria and was walking along the streets of Lagos. So Facebook is one of the biggest tech companies around. So how have big tech been working in Lagos?
I think the ones that have been most successful and have contributed the most, there are two things about them. And I think that goes for any kind of big tech company that is trying to collaborate with startups. Number one is that the startups have to trust your intention. They have to be comfortable with you and not be worried about whatever subterranean agenda you may have for that. The second thing is that you have to show tangible proof that you're really serious about this. It's not that when you have the press conference, your CEO is standing there with the chief technology officer, but the very next day, the startup has to deal with some middle-level guy that knows nothing about technology, knows nothing about the... there's a big tech company that we were working with, and after all the noise, I spoke to one of the people in the management, and she didn't even know anything about the collaboration at all.
Yeah.
Nothing. So those kind of things give the fintech the impression that you're just using them to appear innovative and fresh. You're not really serious about it. I mean, we have a collaboration with EcoBank across Africa now, and that's one bank that has taken collaboration very seriously and actively. Those are the kind of collaborations that fintechs appreciate. And once you establish a reputation for doing that, then you find that a lot of them are coming to you. That's what Facebook has done, and that's what Google has done in Nigeria.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, certainly from our company perspective, we're collaborating with Ericsson. And they've been absolutely brilliant with access to relevant people with the right expertise and great resources and networks. And that's what a fintech needs.
Right.
So, yeah.
Next question. I think we've got time for one more.
Simon Galpin from Bahrain. I wonder about your relationship with the regulators, the central banks in your respective hubs. Have you any strategies for getting them on side and making sure that the regulatory environment is as friendly as it can be for FinTech?
Great, so we have 1 minute, so who wants to go for it?
I can take the National Bank of Belgium and the FSMA, which are the two overseers in Belgium, are what we call structural partners in Beehive. So they help us, they help the startup, they have a help desk also, some kind of advice they can give to startup. And they drive us also on agendas where regulation is a big topic. Like, for instance, GDPR is one of those, data privacy. So I must admit that we are very pleased and very grateful for their support.
I think absolutely the collaboration with the central banks and regulators is absolutely a must-do. And we believe that developing content, relevant content, that can be reused and also used for discussion is absolutely a value that they appreciate. And this is not only linked to your local regulator. If there's a value perceived out there, then the rest is also approaching you. And that's helpful for the entire community.
Yeah, and that's been our experience too. We're working very closely with regulators, central banks, and not just in the Nordics. So, yeah.
Great, thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of this session. If you give a warm round of applause to our panelists. So next up, we have another session in here that will start at 2 o'clock, speeding the opportunity. And we, along the whole week of InnoTribe, we are supporting an amazing opportunity, which is to do with the disaster appeal in Mexico. As you know, there have been a number of different tragedies around the world, and so once you go for a break and you go and get your coffee, you can actually donate to the Save the Children charity, which is a British charity who are helping in Mexico with the disaster relief there. And SWIFT will match every donation made this week. So please go and enjoy your coffee and be generous in your donations. Thank you very much.